teaching the girls how to sew and cook and all those things.
Well, I see.
So, what was I starting to tell about?
How you helped take care of us. You didn't get to go to school.
Well,
Well, 1 year.
I was 11, and I had finished the 6th grade down in the country school there at the homestead. So, here we were on the way out to Lips Camp, number 24 day school on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, not knowing just what we were going to find or get into at all. And my father, in the early days of the automobile, my father decided, because it was an inland town and everyone traveled by train then when you wanted to go a distance, he said, well, I'll hire this garage man who has a new Hupmobile to drive us out there. So that's what we did, and shipped our household goods and so forth on the train, on the freight train. So we drove out in that. Then it was quite an experience, that trip out there, because we went through the Rosebud Reservation, which is east of Pine Ridge. Stayed all night at Rosebud Agency in a hotel there. And I remember so well, we were driving along, my father rode up in the front seat. My father and would hold either, probably Esther. How was it? Leonard was younger than I. Anyway, I don't remember just how we rode. Mother and I rode in the back. Then sometimes Leonard would ride there, and sometimes he'd ride up front. But we'd be driving along, and I remember so well when we came over the hill, and here was Rosebud Agency with its brick buildings, the government buildings there. And I can remember so well my father saying, my, a little Chicago.
After all the prairies, it looked pretty big.
Well, he just made that remark.
I didn't know about that.
And so we drove in there and went to the hotel and got a room at the hotel to spend the night. Well, it was not a very pleasant night, especially for my mother, because she quickly discovered that there were bed bugs.
Oh, boy.
And
My mother was going.
Yeah.
in those days, you don't hear much about bed bugs anymore.
I don't
But
know
in
how
those
they keep them
days,
down.
that was one of the big worries, was bed
Sure.
bugs. So, spent most of the night trying to figure out how we were going to keep from being bitten by the bed bugs. Now, of course, we children didn't worry too much because she didn't say too much.
You didn't know?
I know. But she didn't sleep much that night. Anyway, we went on then the next day out toward the reservation, Pine Ridge Reservation. And on the reservation at that time, we had a good road as far as the Rosebud Agency. But from there on, the roads began to become wagon trails. At that time, the Indians used only wagons and horses to travel. And all the roads angled across the reservation, the prairie, which was all open, there weren't fences, wagon trails, and of course, with the years, they'd wear down, so there'd be ruts. So, until the driver discovered that he couldn't take those trails because on a Hupmobile, those early Hupmobiles were built pretty low. And so, for a while, we'd get stuck on high centers and have to dig out. And then also, it became a problem to find out just where to go. We'd happen to see an Indian horseback or in a wagon and ask him how to get to Lips Camp, number 24 day school. Oh, he'd point off and in his way would tell us, well, follow the main traveled road. Main traveled road. So we had quite a time. We came through the little place right at the edge of the reservation called Black Pipe at that time. Later it was named Norris, South Dakota.
Very small, wasn't it?
Very small place. And Mother had fixed some things to eat along the way because she knew we probably wouldn't find places to eat. And so we would have the lunch along as we went. And we got onto the reservation, and here was a ranch house, pardon me, a log house, a nice log house. And we stopped there to inquire the way to number 24 day school. And she was a lady who was part Indian. Her husband was a white man, we found out later. They had a ranch, and we told her our problem. She started to try to tell us how to get to Lipscomb. And, she finally gave up. She says, I don't know. She says, when are you coming? She knew the man, found out that he would be driving back to Herrick the next day. She said, what would be best if I would just go with you and show you the way, and then come back with the driver tomorrow. If you're returning tomorrow, I'd come back tomorrow. But my husband now, he's gone out riding with the cattle, and she had a big dish pan full of bread dough. She was getting ready to bake bread. It was all risen up. She said, Mother says, oh, what will you do about your bread? Oh, I'll take care of that. She said, I'll work it down and I'll leave a note for my husband and tell him where I've gone and what to do about the bread. And she says, that's no problem. She says, we'll take care of that. I'll just go along with you. That was the old Western spirit, you see.
She was white or Indian?
She was part Indian. She had been a trained nurse, though.
I see.
And then she was part Indian.
Was she Mrs. Ruggles?
Mrs. Ruggles.
Oh, really?
Her husband was Wallace Ruggles.
Yeah.
He was a white man. Well, so she got ready, left the note, and went with us. And it was about the middle of the day. And I believe she gave us a little lunch. We ate a lunch before we left. So she got a little confused, though. She went, this butte, there was a picture of it that
In the
Bill
living room there.
painted out here, called Eagle Nest Butte, which is a landmark in the area.
You see it for
See it.
40
In fact,
miles.
it's the highest point in altitude between the Appalachian Mountains and the Black Hills, Eagle Nest Butte. And so it readily seen all over. So she directed us south of the butte to number 22 day school instead of north of the butte to number 24 day school. So we ended up at the wrong day school. Then
That was about 8 miles or so, wasn't it?
it wasn't too
Not
far,
too
except
far.
that it was getting toward the end of the day. And I remember so well, we turned around then and they told us then how to get to number 24 day school at Lipscomb. Well, we turned around and we stopped out in front of a little store and post office called Porch. It was run by a rancher there by the name of Ab Porch. I remember that Mrs. Porch, the lady, we didn't know who she was then, was sitting in the kitchen. It was summer. In the kitchen door, outside, with a big pan in her lap. She was peeling potatoes for supper, I suppose. And I can remember so well thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if she'd invite us all in for supper?
Yeah.
Pretty hungry.
I was getting hungry. No, it was. It was getting toward sundown. Well, anyway, maybe she did. But of course, they wanted to get to Lipscomb. Anyway, we went on then. And we pulled into Lipscomb just at dusk. And Mother, of course, in the instructions that came from the department, spoke about the house being furnished, and it was a little village, so she just assumed there would be a little store of some kind where groceries could be bought.
Didn't they say there was a commissary with food too?
Oh, yes, a commissary with food, and well, it, of course, it had been vacant for a while, so there was no food in it.
Oh, no.
At that time. Anyway, there was nothing to eat. Well, no place to get anything to eat. So we drove up to the day school. Mother had a can of salmon and a few crackers that she was left over from the food she brought along. And she searched around in the cupboards. There were some cupboards, and she did find a little box of tea with tea in it. So I remember so well, she was so embarrassed because she didn't have anything to feed the driver,
Oh,
Mrs.
boy.
Ruggles, and the family. So she made salmon patties and had tea, and that's what we had for supper. Salmon patties and tea.
Well, you were hungry, probably, too.
That's right. Of course, there wasn't going to be anything for breakfast. So anyway, that was our introduction into Lips Camp. And then the next morning, she fixed up something, I don't remember what it was. And the driver and Mrs. Ruggles started that.
Probably tea. She
Tea,
probably had
I
tea
suppose
for
it
her.
was tea.
Yeah.
And whatever else it was, I do not know. But anyway, then here we were, stranded with no food. So the first thing my father had to do was to find a way, no means of transportation, find somebody that would take him to town someplace to buy some groceries.
Was Mr. Pomeroy, he's the only white man there.
It
Mr.
could have
Pomeroy.
been, it could have
His
been
family hadn't
Elmer
come yet,
Pomeroy.
but he was there.
alone, so possibly he was the one.
He was the boss
Well, as it
farmer.
happened, the Indians happened to be gathering there for a fair. The Indians at that time had fairs, a lot of fairs in different parts of the reservation. And they would gather just for a 3 or 4 day celebration. We called it a fair. They didn't exhibit anything like the fairs we have, but they just would have their... So they were gathering and putting up their tents along the horizon, circling. You tell about it in one of your stories. And of course, Lad, my older brother, who was a little older, got acquainted with some boys right away. Now, I don't remember whether that was a time a little later.
It wasn't, because he didn't come with you
That's right, he
folks.
didn't come with us.
This was another fair.
It was a later time.
But they did have a fair
I'll
the
leave
first
that
day,
out.
yeah.
They had a fair. And so anyway,
The former teacher then came to the fair and found, Leonard told me, that they had left some things in one of the bedrooms, barrels, and in the barrels, here was the food, the sugar and
Oh,
all
my
the things.
goodness.
Oh,
But
yes,
Mother had,
packed, ready to move.
yes, and they came to pick it up and
That's
to
the way
attend the
it
fair,
was.
and here, so that when they came, why, they got out their food and...
That's right. And they got the food out that tided us over then. That's the way that
And then
was.
the Indians had, they knew that he was coming, they had the welcoming ceremony right out, as Leonard told me, right out in the yard. It was quite frightening.
Oh,
Because, well, Mother and Dad had seen Indians come into Gregory and Herrick, but they never had any real close contact.
oh, boy.
But there were some who were educated and spoke English.
Henry Standing Bear, for example.
Yes, and Henry Standing Bear was the instigator of the
He
Crazy
was at
Horse.
Carlisle
Yeah.
University.
Oh.
He's the one who later instigated the building of the Crazy Horse Monument,
Oh,
which
I
is
see.
going on. But tell about the Dad getting the name from the Indians.
Well, no, you tell about that because you know more about it.
Because I asked Leonard, I
Yes,
was too little
all right.
to know. I
You
was
tell
only
about
a
it.
year and a half old, but they get in a large circle, the Indians, and when they have their feasts, they boil up their meat and stuff, and then they go around and
Stew.
pour a stew, and they pour into the bowls, and they drink their stew and use their fingers around. They had the big ceremony and probably a dance, and you can imagine how wide-eyed Leonard and Ethel were.
Sure.
Well,
and
I
Mother.
think Ethel didn't get in on that because I imagine she was sort of helping take care
I
of
bet she was taking care of the babies in the
So that's
house.
the reason I don't remember that.
And Leonard
I
got
was-
to go, and so they presented a war bonnet to my dad. One of the feathers, not the long to the ground, the shorter. And they named him Wanbli Tazatanka, which means
Wambly Tazatanka.
big-bellied eagle.
Big
He
belly.
weighed about 245 pounds at that
Uh-huh.
time.
And
Yeah.
he was about 5'11".
Uh-huh.
And off in the distance was Eagle Nest Butte, and that's what later the
This
town
butte
was
I
named.
spoke about.
Yes, the town was named Wanbli, which was the word for eagle.
It later was.
Later on, they named it, at that time was Lips Camp. And Mr. Cutlip was sort of the leader of this clan. Cutlip was his name, Cutlip.
Cutlet,
No,
yeah.
no,
Cutlip, and Leonard told me that, and
Cutlip?
Mrs. Serby's account tells about Mr. Cutlip, who brought this tribe
I thought there were two families, a Cut family and a Lip family.
Oh, I don't know, maybe Leonard had it wrong. But Mrs. Serby said that she and Roy talked to Mr. Cutlip, and that this group of Indians had been out on Pass Creek with a schoolhouse, with the government schoolhouse. And they were going to divide the Rosebud from the Pine Ridge. And there was quite a bit of bickering about where the line would be. But somehow, Cutlip, or Lip, whichever he was, he found the government decided that they would move that building. They moved not only
24-day school.
the Episcopal Chapel. They moved both of those buildings. I wonder just how they did it. From this place on Pass Creek, which is how far? 20-some
Oh
miles.
my goodness.
I would say about
Yeah, and
20
they
miles.
probably used all Indian
Rolling
laborers
logs
to bring it
and everything.
over. And this had happened, there had been a couple of teachers. One of them was Mrs. Connor, Mrs. Wells. So Mrs. Serby, Mrs. Wells was one of the, she was an Irish
Teacher down
woman who
Pass
was
Creek.
married to a man who was a half-breed. And then there had been another teacher there. So that was the reason that they had the welcoming ceremony. They
Mrs.
knew.
Craven was one of the
And
teachers
Mrs.
down there.
Craven too, you see, they had a
She was
series
a half-breed Indian.
of part Indians. So then you go on from there. 'cause I
No,
think
you
this-
know all of this, and I'm not familiar,
I-
except I know it was moved from Pass Creek to into
Yeah.
Lips Camp.
In order to move, they had these ruts in the roads, and there was little creeks. There was a creek that was called, not only Pass Creek, but what was that? Big creek where you went, Bear Creek, when you had to go down. I've often wondered,
Well, that was not between Pass Creek and
wasn't it? Well, they
Lips
knew
that'd
how
be west
to,
of-
they knew how to circumvent.
To me, it's west.
Yeah, to circumvent Bear Creek. But you know, this is a sidelight. I was reading in a book about Indians, and at one time, not too long ago, they found where the early Indians had camped on Bear Creek, South Dakota, and this was at the time when they cooked by taking the stomach of an animal and making a sack of
A
it
sack.
and putting the food in there, and they found the stones, and they would build the fire and have get the water. The reason they didn't hang it over the fire because this would burn. They heated water. I don't know what they used. Got the water hot. No, the way they heated the water was not this. They took this is right.
This bit.
They took this big, this bag, they heated stones on the fire, and they dropped the hot stones into the water up in the bag that was inflammable, and they cooked, and just think now, long, cooked their buffalo meat, and I was surprised to find that they dug up and found this campsite, and it's thousands of years old.
Thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Now finish the story
Oh.
about getting the school up to Lips Camp.
yeah.
Oh, yes, and I often wondered how they managed over those trails, but they did, and they rebuilt. Now, number 22 was almost a duplicate in the way the house and the schoolhouse.
They were
Because the
built.
government, they were built in the same
Alike.
design.
Mhm.
We went
Why
down.
did they have to move it? Couldn't they
Well,
just
it was
sort of-
something about the dividing of
Change it.
Rosebud. They had to get this group of Indians here. There was a lot of Indians in that area that would have to become Rosebud, go to a Rosebud school, unless they had a school near enough. So not only did this small clan, is what they weren't tribes, clan, come, but it also, some of the ones that lived around, and it was something, I have it in a book
See,
here.
these schools were day schools. They
Just
called them
a day-
day schools because in those days, they did not bus children to school.
No.
They had
And
boarding
they had-
schools for the older ones, wasn't it? The boarding schools was for after this, but the mothers didn't like sending their little children off to boarding school. But they,
Esther, may I interrupt?
sure, yeah, because I wish I
The
knew.
day schools were located in different localities. The Indian people were responsible to get their own children into the day school.
I see.
And they were usually situated in an Indian village around on the reservation. Then, so number 24 day school and number 22 day school were both day schools for the Indian children in that community. Now, there were boarding schools. There was a boarding school at Pine Ridge Agency in which any of the children that wanted to could go in there to stay at the dormitories and go to school, away from their families. But usually the Indians didn't want this for their little children, but there were, because I know that the beginners often went there. I taught.
You mean to
this.
boarding school?
Oh, yes.
Beginners went. I didn't know
Definitely.
that. I thought it was...
taught there a few days.
Oh, you did?
Before I went. I started, I agreed to teach the whole year, and this was when Howard could have gotten the job at the boarding school of Director of Physical Education. And he went to Millbank then to play ball. Well, I stayed there, and
In Pine
And-
Ridge, was it?
yes,
Oh.
Pine Ridge Agency.
I didn't know this at all.
And left Patty there with my folks in Wambalee, and with the expectation that we probably would, you know, after he was through there, would come back, perhaps he had the opportunity, and we would pick up Patty and go to Pine Ridge, and I would teach, and he would have this job. Well, that's beside the point of what we're saying here. But they did have, because I had first
So you
grade.
know, right?
I had first grade. That was my position that I was going to do. I taught there about a week and had registration. In fact, especially because this one little, the names, this one little boy, cute little Indian boy, I asked him what his name was. Of course, I had the list of whom I had, but then I would communicate with them naturally. And he says, his name was Pew, P-U-G-H, Pew Bullstail.
Hugh Boltstale.
That was
For
his
goodness
name.
sake.
Pew
Hugh
Bullstail.
Boltstale.
That's
Now,
really
where did he get the P-U-G-H? Because that's a
Yeah,
Welsh name.
He's
Yeah.
part-
Well,
Probably part
some
white.
man,
I suppose, yeah.
Thought
Mhm.
that
That's
his
a
folks
father.
named him for some man by the name of
Pew.
Pew. Don't you see?
Hugh Boltstale.
And
I
maybe
didn't
some white man that thought it'd be a good joke.
Sure, yeah, could
That
be.
the Indians
Sure.
wouldn't realize what it
What it
was
meant, yeah.
exactly.
It wouldn't mean anything to them. They wouldn't care anyway.
No.
Because they're not that type.
No.
Anyway, so this was just to
Oh, I'm
substantiate the
so
point.
glad to hear
Little
this.
Primary
Little
children also went to boarding school if their
If they-
parents so desired. They could go there.
Now, was it true, which I read in one book, that when they went to the boarding school, the boys had to have their hair cut? They couldn't wear the braids.
Now, I don't know about the boarding school.
They couldn't wear their braids.
Esther,
Uh-huh.
let me say this. I only know for sure about number 24 day school, but they were at this time trying to get the Indians to adapt themselves to the white ways, including the speaking of the English language. They were not, it was against the rules for the Indian children to speak the Lakota Sioux, the Indian language, on the school grounds. They had to speak English.
And Dad
It
wasn't
was
supposed to.
also required that there were certain things that had to be done. The boys, the teacher had to clip the boys' hair every so often. He was the barber for the boys. And so the boys had their hair cut. And of course, the easiest way was just to clip it off short, and then when it got so long, every so often, I think once a month or something, they were to cut the hair. The woman, mother, was not in the school. She was at the cottage, the day school cottage, and it was her responsibility to see that the girls had their hair washed, shampooed, and washed every so often. I don't know, I don't think it was, I think it was every 2 weeks, something like that.
And
I'm sure it
deloused.
wasn't-
They had to
Deloused.
deloused.
Well,
Did they naturally have lice, or was that
well-
picked up from the white man, or what?
I don't know
Yeah.
about that part. I do know that when you realize the conditions under which they lived, it's natural, and that people had lice. I think whites had lice too.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But they had fine-tooth combs that were issued. The government issued all of these things. And this is what had to be done, that before she shampooed the girl's hair, she would take the fine-tooth comb and comb it down through the hair to see if there were any nits or lice in the hair. If there were any nits on the hair, or any lice showed up, then they had a certain shampoo or ointment that was used on the hair first, and then followed by a shampoo. So this is what she did for the girls, and of course the boys, this part of the clipping was to get rid of the head lice.
Yeah,
There was
sure.
lots of lice, not only head lice, but body lice.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the girls had long, black, heavy hair in braids. Then that was quite a job, chore. And then
What about
At
the
the
baths?
back,
The
I'm
bath.
going to
Oh,
tell
we're
that.
getting to that.
in the back of the schoolroom, it was just a one room, like a one-room country school, but on one end of it was the bath and laundry room. And there were just stalls built here, probably two, possibly, I think about two. And there was a laundry stove with a boiler. And of course, all the water was pumped by hand from the well. And the boys' job was to carry in the water to heat, and the wood to build the fire, to heat on the stove. And they had galvanized wash tubs for the bathrooms in those days, you see. There was no running water. And so every Monday was bath day. And every Monday morning, all the children in the school were given baths in these bathrooms. And of course, the water had to be carried in, heated, and the tubs filled, and then emptied each time. And not only that, but the government issued clothing for the children, long underwear, and that was kept out in the commissary, and they'd issue that to each child, would get 2 suits of underwear, one to change, and also bolts of cloth, hickory cloth. It all was little blue and white striped, called it hickory cloth, to make the girls' dresses and the boys' shirts. Now it was every Monday morning. Then they took the baths, put on the clean underwear, and then of course that was followed. After that was done, then they had to be washed. Then there was a wash day, and then it was Mother's job to teach them how to wash clothes, and they had to be hung out. We had big long clotheslines, and you'd see these long clotheslines full of the long underwear.
And
And
washing machine or do it by?
washing machine. Yeah, washing machine by hand, of course, and the boys would help. They'd furnish the
Water
water with
power,
that.
or what do they
Pump
call
the
it?
water.
Well, they didn't have water power because they didn't have running water, see?
They didn't know there was
What do you
no,
call it though?
there was no electricity, just a hand
What did they
washer.
call it?
I don't know, but they had the hand wringers too, that the
Oh,
boys,
yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
call it? Oh, wow, I
don't
remember seeing it as a kid.
Well, that was
Well-
water power cleaners because all you did was attach it to a faucet and turn the faucet on, then that ran a pump underneath. I could, you could go in and the thing inside.
this wasn't that modern.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
this
And they
was
were usually wooden
definitely-
tubs, those old water
They
power.
got-
I remember seeing them.
Yeah,
Well,
sure.
these were wooden tub washing machines,
Oh, yeah.
run
They
by
were.
hand, and the wringer run by hand, and the boys would help with that. The girls were, she was supposedly
Teaching.
instructing the girls how to wash clothes. Well, on top of that, every day she was to furnish a hot meal at noon for all the school children. And she was to bring the girls over. They came by turns, several of them, and had them help her, and she was to teach them how to cook. And they would help prepare the meal. Now, the food was furnished by the government. And there would be things like, well, flour and all the staples, sugar, and lots of navy beans, and bacon,
Salt pork, a lot of salt pork.
yes,
Yeah.
and things of that sort. So she had to bake the bread, see that the bread, baked her own bread for these. And so she was a very busy person.
Sure.
She was just as busy as my father was. Now, in addition to all of this, there was the drug room on the other end of the school building, which was kept locked. And in that drug room were shelves of all kinds of drugs. And once a month, the government doctor would come out from station at Allen or Kyle, I've forgotten which, he would come, and that would be no school, but he would be in the school building, and the Indians would all come to see the doctor. That would be Doctor Day. And the Indians would come and with whatever complaint they had, and he would diagnose what the problem was and give a prescription. And it would be Dad's job. He would give it explicitly, and the bottles, of course, of medicine were all labeled, and he would, the doctor would tell how to administer it all, just like a pharmacy. And it would be, that was my father's response, the teacher's response.